Welcome to the Covert Nerd Podcast. I really appreciate the time that you give me. It means a lot. Today's episode is really awesome because I had the opportunity to interview Bob Hall, who is a playwright, comic artist, and writer. He was at an event that we had here locally, and I got to sit down with him for a little while and talk to him about the work he's done in the past, people he's met. At the event, there are people in the background, and I was sitting next to a door that dinged every time somebody walked in. So when you hear that background noise, that's what it's from. I just wanted to tell you that up front. So let's just dive right in. You can visit bobhall.com to find out more information about him and his work. Let's listen. I'm here with the infamous or famous Bob Hall here today at the Behind the Gallery event. I had the privilege of talking to Bob here. We're showcasing his Armed and Dangerous artwork. So I just wanted to talk to Bob about the Armed and Dangerous artwork. Could you tell us, Bob, a little bit about what was the genesis behind that title and where that all came from?
I was doing Shadow Man for Valiant, and then Valiant got sold to Acclaim, which was a video company who knew nothing about running a comic book, but that's another company, but that's another story. They went bankrupt doing it. I started getting from the editor in chief some what I thought were strange notes saying that I had been drawing the character wrong. And I'd been drawing him for several years then, and I thought, that's weird. And it finally occurred to me. It involved the race that the character was. He had always been a Creole, a mixed race person in New Orleans, and they said, no, he's always supposed to have been just a natural black guy. And I said, well, there are plenty of black characters in the book, but not that's very specific in New Orleans, a Creole. I couldn't figure out what the deal was. It finally occurred to me that they wanted to make a video game out of it, and they wanted the lead character to be an African American. And I said, okay, well, look, I'll do 3 more issues, but that's a different character than what I've been writing. And why don't I've been doing it for several years, why don't we turn it over to somebody else? And in fact, that was the case. They never did really turn the series over. They stopped the series and restarted it with the character that Acclaim wanted. And they said, why don't you develop your own series? And I decided, and they particularly wanted some sort of crime series. And I decided I wanted to do the Irish Mafia in New York. There was a group called the Westies, and they had existed in Hell's Kitchen. And we're beginning to, it was just the beginning at that time in the 90s that it was being called Clinton then, the area, and that particular group was dying out. And I thought, well, it's a good time to do something about them. Actually, now they've gone back to calling it Hell's Kitchen. Most of the businesses do, because they find it much more romantic to tell people they're going to a restaurant in Hell's Kitchen. But at that time, they were an interesting group. The Irish, there were all these Irish bars, very low rent, toward the end of 42nd Street and all over that area. And you met a lot of these guys on the street, and also they were stagehands, because they were what were called walkers in stagehand parlance, which meant the people that didn't do anything, but that a union requirement forced them to hire them. And they were just members of the Irish mob that got extra work by coming in and sitting around and smoking and looking at the racing form and calling their bookies while the real stagehands loaded in a show. But it was pretty colorful, and I thought, well, I can do something with that area. I know it pretty well. I'd lived in New York, and while I didn't live in that area, I did a lot of theater work, and the theater work the two areas just butted up against each other. Broadway, the west part of end of Broadway ending at 8th Avenue and just overlapping a little bit, and then the Hell's Kitchen sort of came the other direction. And so that's what I did, and I really liked the series. It was black and white. It had a... This is my wife calling.
Yeah, that's okay.
Right at the moment.
We can cut this out.
No, it's not. It's a robocall, which means
gotta love this.
It's probably some political agency wanting money again. I started doing it, and the fun part was that I could use a lot of stories that I'd heard while living in New York, and not necessarily the entire plot line, but I could... Incidents that I came up with were... a lot of them were for real. For instance, the first book involved a guy who had been... executed by the mob, and somebody was called in to chop him up, and I won't get into the details, but when I first moved to New York, in a laundromat about 2 blocks away from where I lived, a severed head was found in the dryer.
Oh my gosh!
And
this was early 90s.
This was early 70s.
Okay.
90s is when I did the book, but when I first moved to New York, it was a wilder place. And I had always wondered, what the heck was that head doing in a dryer? And I decided the first story would be about why that head was in the dryer. Later on, one of my favorites was doing one that was the Nebraska Highway Patrol stopped a car going across Interstate 80 that turned out to be full of cocaine. Yeah. And they dealt with the perpetrators and got them to tell them where they were supposed to leave the car, which was in New York. And the FBI stepped in and said, it's crossing state lines, it's our jurisdiction. And there was a big argument about it. And finally, the Nebraska Highway Patrol gave in and said, okay, we'll let you have jurisdiction, but we want to go with you to New York and watch the FBI in action and see this all happen. And I was told this. They swear it's true. I think I know from a police officer, so I tend to believe it. And they went. They staked out in a restaurant, and watched where they had parked the car. Well, it was there for several days, and so it got reported as an abandoned car, and New York Tow showed up to tow it away. And once New York Tow puts the hooks in, there's nobody's going to stop them, including the FBI, who went out and got in an argument with the tow truck guy, and finally attempted to arrest the tow truck guy, put him in a car, and his partner in the truck sent out an SOS. And all of a sudden, tow trucks pulled up and blocked the street, and there's this huge embroilment between. And so the Nebraska Highway Patrol is saying, the FBI in action, and I was sure that my guys were sitting in it, or somebody similar, were sitting in another restaurant somewhere watching this and saying, I think we'll let this one go by. But that made a whole story arc. So I had great fun. Well, by the time I got to the second arc of the story, Acclaim was starting to go under. And
is it like this huge thing of...
I had moved by that time to England. And I did it because it was during that big boom that happened, the collector market in the 90s. And if you'd been around a while, you just knew it was going to bubble, it was going to burst. And I said, I put a little money away from this. I'm getting paid every month. I'm under contract. I want to do something while the dough is still coming in, and so we went and lived in I'd always wanted to live in Europe, and we went to England because since I was working all the time, it seemed like a place where I spoke the language was important, and eventually we lived in Dublin. And so finished the first arc. Well, I don't think anybody ever saw the last couple of issues of the second arc because the print runs got smaller and smaller and smaller. But in the meantime, I had started the third arc. And even though Acclaim was going under, Fabian, I never can say the last name, Neitzia, and Madeline Robbins, who was he was the editor-in-chief by that time, not the same person that I'd been dealing with before. And Madeline Robbins, who was the particular editor of it, said, look, finish as much of it as you can, and we'll keep paying you as long as it's possible. So I got 3.5 issues. I almost got the whole thing done. I had got 3.5 issues in. I got word finally saying, okay, you got to stop now because Acclaim is going under next week. And I thought, well, I'll never see those pages again. And last year, Greg Goldstein, who is the CEO of IDW, called me and said, I was working for Acclaim back in the 90s, and they gave me a cardboard box full of art to deal with, and I never did anything with it, and I finally started going through it, and you have about 60 pages of art in there. So I got the art back, and here it is in Behind the Glass Gallery, finally seeing the light of day, which is great.
That's awesome.
I'm trying to find out who has the rights to Arms and Dangerous, because while I presume that Dinesh Shamdasani may have bought it when he bought the Valiant catalog, nobody seems to know. And it's
a mystery.
It's a mystery, and so I keep saying, sending a message saying, can you check and see if you own this? But I'm not sure he knows.
Is there any talk of publishing some of this officially?
It's in ownership limbo.
That's part of the limbo.
And
okay.
In fact, the IDW guy said, "Yeah, I'd be interested if you own it." And I said, "No, I was doing under contract, so I was doing work for hire,
Some sort of anthology, maybe."
And he won't touch it unless ownership is for sure. So I've got a feeling it may just be stuck. I do think I may try, if all else fails, just to put it up. In fact, I'd like to put the all of Armed and Dangerous up online, even if it was just without charging for it to let people see it.
Just to get the finished product out.
Yeah.
Now, you've worked for multiple companies. I've got the famous What If that you did for Marvel, and you've done some work for DC. You mentioned Valiant. Which one of those do you think, in your opinion, was your favorite, and why?
No, well, it depended on, I can't really say for sure. The Marvel was Marvel, and I got to do Marvel Comics, and it was a big thrill because all of a sudden you're working for Marvel, and so that was wonderful. Valiant was great because Jim Shooter, who had moved over to Valiant, wanted me to write as well as draw, and that was a thrill. That again, it was just terrific to be able to do that, and writing your own and drawing your own stuff is a whole different experience. You're, in essence, interacting with yourself. And then DC, I got to do Batman, and so I got to do Batman. What can you say? Probably one of the biggest thrills was working for Charlton, just because I finally was hired. I was a pro, and so that was all of them had something to be said for them. I got to work with Denny O'Neil too on the Batman stuff, and Denny is a legend in the business, and that was just as he was retiring, and that was I'm grateful that I got to work with him.
Yeah, that kind of leads into another question I thought of what you worked with a lot of artists, writers, things like that. What is an artist or writer that you haven't gotten to work with that you would like to work with? Is there somebody that sticks out in your mind?
No.
Not really?
Well, there really isn't. It's not that I wouldn't want to work with people. There are people that I always wanted to work with. If it was me writing, then I can name a ton of people, most of whom only do their own stuff anymore. There are a lot of highly competent artists who don't do their own writing, Diodato and people like that, who, sure, I'd love to have them do something. And then some of the people are so improbable. You'd love to have something you did drawn by Neil Adams, let's say, some of the great legends, but that will never happen. The one that I missed that it could have happened, and I actually could have made it happen, was John Buscema, who was my mentor in the business, and I'd love to have had him draw something that I wrote. I did ink one of his covers, and that was fun.
There you go.
So
you kind of did.
Yeah.
Talking about young artists, we've got some young artists here. What do you think are some advantages that young artists have today that maybe you didn't have 30, 40 years ago?
They have no advantages that I didn't. They have what they have going for them is social media, the ability to self-publish, and actually get it out to people. And of course, a lot of people have done quite well with that. What they don't have is, if you're working for the big companies, they were really earn while you learn businesses when I got into them. And they're not anymore. You really have to be, your work has to be finished and ready to roll anymore. I mean, everybody improves once they start doing it, but the level of every artist at either Marvel or DC is, I think, much higher in some ways than when we started. There were just a bunch of us who were incompetent, and there were a few people who came in with a great level of competence, somebody like John Byrne, but a lot of us were just, oh my God, what do you do when you finally get a job? I have to be able to draw anything, you mean? And for a while you'd be in shock until you figured out how to do it. And you got better and better and better as you went. There are a lot of people who say, oh, the art was so much better in the old days. And I'm not sure that that's true. I think that there were some amazing people back then. There's some amazing people now. I do think that there were some magnificent storytellers when I got in the business that, and maybe some very individualistic people that might have trouble working in the superhero field today. Walt Simonson, for instance, was always superb. And for a while after the business fell apart around the year 2000, people like Walt didn't get work. I wasn't surprised that I didn't get work because I'd left Marvel, and all of a sudden I'd never been able to really go back to Marvel. They had me do a cover occasionally. But my work is considered. People will keep saying, "Oh, God, that's great. That's that. I love that old school stuff." And no matter how much I try to say I'm going to rejuvenate my work, my mentality is who I am. I am who I am, and something comes through in the work that I think is perhaps not what is happening today, or maybe that's just me saying, why don't I get some more work?
Talking about the crash in 2000, late 90s, what do you think, what good came of that, do you think?
None.
Nothing?
No, there was no good that came of it, per se. It was, for a lot of brilliant editors got fired. They really cleaned out the editorial staffs. I think that was as much of a tragedy as anything else. And there were a lot of people who ought to be working who aren't working. And I think a lot of the people who are really good who are working would still be working. So I don't think much good came out of it. I think the problems are still the same for the industry. One of the big ones is that the people don't deal with this much, but they lost the kids market. And it wasn't just subject matter, it's that here we are sitting in a comic book store. Well, comics aren't in drugstores anymore.
Distribution's changed.
They're not in supermarkets anymore. If you were to park your kids now in front of the comic book stand and leave them while you shopped, you'd be arrested. But so you've got the problem that you're trying to they don't try to sell comics to kids because kids never see comics, and so you have to depend on your parents to take you to a comic book store, and that's a whole different world. And I think there were a lot of people who were surprised when the balloon finally burst, that, hey, there's still I would hear people say there's still a kids market. Well, there wasn't a kids market. There had been multiple generations of I think that would be since comics had been primarily distributed in comic book shops, and hey, that audience had disappeared. So now what's happened is that it's become from the crashes, it's become a niche market, and a few comics make a lot of money. They will sell. Something will sell, but most of them don't. Most of them run in very small batches compared to what they were selling once. And it remains to be seen what will happen when the movies they become farm teams for the movies and TV. And that's all great, but I am curious to see what happens when the, forgive me fans, but the fad of comic book TV and comic book movies begins to peter out. I think it's very much like the James Bond craze, when everything in the 70s was a spy movie of some kind and a spy TV series. And it ran its course. And there's still spy movies, but they're the cream. Sure. And there will always be, I think, superhero movies now, but they'll be the cream. Plus, it's happened over and over. Westerns in the
50s or whatever.
50s. Yeah. Everything was a Western, So it is what happens. People get into a certain genre. Remember sword and sandal Roman Italian-made movies, where these things occur. The superhero movies, I think, will go on, but I don't think there will be the multiple movies coming out there. And I don't know what will happen then. What will happen when there is no movies to be a farm team for.
So you see some similarities between the comic book balloon bust in the late 90s to the superhero movies that are going on right now.
Yeah, I think that it's another balloon of a different kind. But I'm curious to see what the future is. What does the future hold? I'm pleased to see independent comics, graphic novels. I sometimes am amazed that Superman is nearly 80, and that it's lasted. I got to admit, I find it difficult after reading basically the same plots over and over again. It's not that people are stealing the plots. It's just that there's just so much to go around, and you can see it in the films. Everybody has to save the world. They have to have an origin. You know what I mean? It's and I find it kind of difficult to keep up with the superhero world anymore. I feel and every once in a while I'll go back to a comic book store and buy an arc of something or buy a compendium of something and enjoy it. But I find it difficult often when I buy them. I say, oh, this looks interesting, and then I give up about
halfway through.
Halfway through.
I was just going to ask you too. When you go to a comic book store, what are some titles that you really like or you still enjoy, and something that catches your eye?
I keep up with the Avengers because I have a soft spot for
West
them.
Coast Avengers.
but I don't do it regularly. And beyond that, there really isn't anything. Not a thing. Well,
what did you buy? You said you went in and bought something. I guess care to share?
Yeah, I will buy. I buy mainly if I really think this art is sensational, and that's my criteria mainly. There are a few people I like. The oh God, now I can't think of it. Is it Ed Brubaker who does the criminal series? Yeah, and Sean. Can't think of his last name. Who draws them? I think it's a sensational combination, and I like their stuff a lot. I love Mignola when he's doing his own stuff. I think he's my favorite artist of going on right now, because he's one of the few people to really incorporate Kirby into his work and succeed in being entirely on individual of his own as well. One of the supreme stylists who is always just his own person. So.
Okay. Speaking of Kirby, have you met him, I assume, in the past, or did you meet Jack?
He had moved to L.A. by the time I got working with Marvel when I worked in the office. I never met him. I talked to him on the telephone.
Okay.
I edited one of his books when I was briefly an editor at Marvel. I edited Devil Dinosaur. And I had to find excuses to call Kirby because the book was so far ahead. Every book I had was behind, except that one, which was way ahead.
Well, he was the king of putting out, 10 pages a day or whatever it was?
I mean, usually it was about 6, but he could do it. It was amazing.
Amazing. So, well, I better let you go. You got to get started.
Hopefully, there are some people who want something.
There you have it.
So we'll see.
I could have just sat down and
Thanks.
talked to Bob for hours. He has so many stories about the work he's done, the people he's met. It was an honor to sit down and talk with him. Hopefully, we can do something like this in the future with Bob or similar artists. Again, you can find out more information about Bob at bobhall.com. You can see where he's going in the future. He goes to a lot of cons and events like this. You can go to covertnerd.net and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or pretty much any other podcast catcher of your choice. Also, you can leave me an audio message on SpeakPipe at covertnerd.net and let me know your opinions and thoughts and views on nerd stuff. I would really appreciate the feedback. You can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or email cn@covertnerd.net. You can record an audio message and send it to me that way. I might put it on the show. So again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.